My name is Dennis Fagan. I'm a retired detective in New York City. I run the security for World Wrestling, and one of our wrestlers that lives down there is missing.
And what's his name?
Chris Benoit.
WWE, formerly known as WWF, was founded in February 1980 and has been on the screens for millions of engaged viewers worldwide. Known for its dramatic storytelling, colorful characters, athleticism, and showmanship, WWE has taken the wrestling entertainment business by storm. However, not without its controversies. Chris Benoit was born May 21, 1967 in Montreal, Canada. From a very young age, Chris aspired to be one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, following and adopting the wrestling patterns of Bret Hart and Thomas Billington, the Dynamite Kid. At the age of 12, Chris attended a local wrestling event and from then trained tirelessly to become a professional wrestler. After training in the Hart family dungeon, which was a wrestling school located in the basement of the Hart mansion, Chris would go on to build an exceptional wrestling career. Beginning his journey, Chris would make his debut in a tag team match in Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling promotion on November 22, 1985. From 1985 to the year 2007, Chris Benoit featured for Stampede Wrestling, NJPW, WCW, ECW, and then finally WWE. During his time at NJPW, Chris met and formed strong bonds with fellow wrestlers Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero, where they would follow each other professionally throughout until they all reached the WWE. Between 1989 and 1997, Chris was married to a Canadian woman called Martina, with who they shared 2 children, Megan and David. The marriage came to an end once Chris met and fell for Nancy Sullivan. It is likely the two would have first met in ECW, where Nancy was already married to Kevin Sullivan, a fellow wrestler. Whilst it has been said by Nancy's sister that the relationship between Nancy and Kevin had been deteriorating prior to the arrival of Chris, Chris's arrival would play an integral part of what would be the end for Nancy and Kevin. Kevin attempted to heighten his on-screen feud with Chris by adding his wife into the equation. Benoit and Nancy were instructed to spend more time together and create an on-screen relationship with one another, whereby the fans would believe Chris had actually stolen Kevin's wife away from him, adding fuel to the fire that had been created by the on-screen feud. In an ironic twist, fiction then became reality when the two's feelings began to grow for one another, which eventually resulted in Chris divorcing his wife and Nancy divorcing her husband, allowing the pair to be together officially. Despite both Chris and Kevin being a part of the WCW roster, it has been said by Chris that Kevin remained professional during their time at WCW together and did not allow his personal life to impact his professionalism. Between 1997 to 2000, Chris remained a part of the WCW roster until eventually Chris decided to leave and join up with Vince McMahon in WWE. As mentioned prior, both Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko would follow Chris in his move to WWE, where their bond would continue to grow exponentially. Whilst it would appear Chris and Nancy had moved on to greener pastures, it would soon come to light that there was so much more beneath the surface. In May 2003, Nancy had filed for divorce as well as a protective order, alleging cruel treatment as well as stating Chris would fly into a rage for no reason, destroying furniture in the house. However, on August 19th, the two had reconciled and the filing was dropped. Despite the filing being dropped, it was said the couple would have periods apart from one another and that the couple were experiencing ongoing struggles within their relationship. Being a part of the WWE came with huge pressures and demands to always be in the top physical condition and adopting a superhuman, unnatural physique. Due to this requirement, many of the roster were avid steroid users, and Chris was amongst those users. It is likely this played a significant role in the downfall of his personal life and his psyche, as well as other factors we will investigate. November 13, 2005, Chris's closest friend, Eddie Guerrero, was found unconscious by his nephew Chavo and was later pronounced dead upon the ambulance arriving. An autopsy concluded that Guerrero died as a result of acute heart failure due to underlying atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. It was noted, Past steroid prescription pills and alcohol abuse was listed as contributing factors. Many believed that Eddie's death was the catalyst that led to the deterioration of Chris's mental state. On the day of the funeral, it was said Chris was inconsolable, and that it was evident Chris needed to take some time away from the WWE to heal. However, instead of taking the opportunity to find himself again, Chris instead decided to fly to Europe the day after the funeral to link back up with the WWE. Despite Chris's attempts to move forward and continue his career, Chris's inability to address his grief would only arise the darkness beneath the surface. June 25, 2007, Chris, Nancy, and his son Daniel were found dead in their home. In the months prior to this tragedy, Chris had been displaying signs of paranoia, claiming an entity was out to get him. This even resulted in the family moving house to a gated mansion that 2 German shepherds patrolled. Speculation into how the family met their end rose, and an investigation was launched into the murders of the family, with Chris being the prime suspect. Following a police investigation, it transpired Chris had murdered both Nancy and Daniel. Reports state following a dispute with Nancy, Chris bound Nancy by her hands and feet with tape, and an electrical cord was wrapped around her neck where she was ultimately choked to death. It has also been reported Nancy had blood on her head, indicating Chris may have struck her head into the ground during the struggle. It was also reported hours later, Chris suffocated his son Daniel to death. Reports show Daniel had Xanax in his system the night of the murder and was likely unconscious when it happened. The following day, Chris made several calls to neighbors and colleagues where he would try to maintain appearances to avert suspicion. Chris also made 2 final text messages which read, "My physical address is 130 Green Meadow Lane, Fayetteville, Georgia, 30215 in AMP. The dogs are in the enclosed pool area. Garage side door is open." It is believed, following these final text messages, Chris used his lat pull-down machine to hang himself. Despite what had been reported, many wrestlers who worked alongside Chris felt it was inconceivable that he would have committed such a heinous crime. Chris Jericho stated, "Anyone who knows Chris knows he is a caring, heart-filled guy. If you lined up 1,000 guys and said which guy would do this, he'd be the last guy you would guess." Bret Hart also reiterated this statement. Throughout his career, Benoit endured countless blows to the head, suffering an array of concussions and injuries. Following tests conducted on Benoit's brain show these repeated traumas would ultimately take a toll on his mental health, leading to a condition known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. CTE is a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head injuries, commonly found in athletes involved in contact sports like wrestling. The disease affects the brain's ability to function, leading to memory loss, depression, aggression, and ultimately, insanity. The autopsy revealed that Chris Benoit had an enlarged heart, likely caused by years of intense physical activity and possibly exacerbated by the use of substances like steroids. Combined with the stress of his personal life, it's possible that Benoit's physical and mental health issues became overwhelming, leading to this tragic outcome. Following this tragedy, the WWE came under great scrutiny. Whilst Chris himself said in an interview in 2004, "The world doesn't push you into the depths of darkness. It's not the world of wrestling that drove him to alcohol, or the world of wrestling drove him to drugs. No, you do that to yourself." It was still thought by many that the WWE's doping negligence was to blame for Chris's actions. Following heavy criticism, the WWE made an attempt to reform their image by making steps to ensure they tightened their wellness policy to prevent wrestlers from finding loopholes to use and/or abuse drugs. In addition to this, the WWE would completely disassociate themselves from the Benoit name, recalling any Chris Benoit merchandise, as well as refuse to promote or acknowledge the disgraced wrestler. In the wrestling world, Chris held 22 championships and was held in high regard amongst some of the greatest wrestlers of all time. However, it is Chris's actions outside of the ring that ultimately had him erased from the wrestling universe. The Chris Benoit murder continues to be a haunting reminder of the dark side that can lurk within even the most celebrated individuals. It serves as a tragic, cautionary tale, forcing us to confront the darkest corners of the human psyche.